so we stay caught up. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about rangeland traditional and local ecological knowledge. And so the first thing is you can discuss with your neighbors or in your head, whatever you prefer. What is traditional ecological knowledge to your knowledge? And what is local ecological knowledge? Who possesses these different types of knowledges and why are they important?
Yeah, so in nothing about like easily informations. Other things like that, it's no. There's something that we need to it's somewhere like look them at something making sad and also some plan. It's just the range should be doing things and on that lane, but people live here, that's I think it's something that has something very good things, but yeah, like leave the house are the same. That's not similar, but yes, yeah, yeah. It's actually yeah, yeah. But I know how many voters. Yeah.
Okay, so these slides have a lot of text, so I apologize. Traditional ecological knowledge is the accumulation, ongoing accumulation, because it still exists, of knowledge, practice, and beliefs about the relationships between living organisms, which was developed in time immemorial by indigenous people over multiple generations with direct contact with their environment and the organisms in their environment. These types of knowledges are typically passed down through oral tradition, although of course in more modern times we do have some written records as well. And for some tribes, there are better written records than others. Tribes, for example, in Northern California were slightly less affected than the tribes in kind of the more densely populated areas of California, like Southern California and the Central Coast, where there was a lot more violence and displacement. Written records, of course, are, like I said, becoming more common. Oftentimes, traditional ecological knowledge, no tribe, no indigenous people are not monoliths. All tribes have different perspectives and views. That's important to remember. Generally speaking, though, a lot of traditional ecological knowledges and ways of knowing with indigenous and tribal people are developed off the basis that all organisms and elements of that environment are interconnected and important in supporting each other for different ecological or spiritual processes. And in a sense, all organisms and non-living I don't know how to term it exactly, are considered kin. So like even boulders. And so every component of the ecosystem, biotic or abiotic, is important. And we have some type of familial relationship with them. And so this is often also developed based off of intimate relationships with these environments. And again, through multiple generations of getting to know individual species over time in different weathers and different climates and different places and through trading. And seeing intimately how they respond to environmental factors as you go out to the landscape to either tend to it or to gather. And so it's important to remember, like we see in the fire here, or the photo on the bottom where there's fire, a lot of these ecosystems have been tended for centuries, thousands of years, for as long as we know in archaeological records, since there's been humans. And so Again, what exactly is a pristine habitat? I don't know. I don't think one exists. What do we call pristine and why do we call it pristine is a whole nother thing. And I think it's really important to remember that all of our lands have been touched by humans and have been managed for a really long time. And when we forget that because we want to forget about some of the horrific past that has happened, we also forget about all of the important management that has occurred that has really taken care of these ecosystems. And that can inform a lot of the land management we could implement these days in modern times. And like I mentioned at the beginning, this is an ongoing accumulation. And it's also important to remember traditional ecological knowledge is not just something of the past, it's something of the present, of people that still exist, and that is still being continuously developed. So oftentimes these kind of like intimate relationships with organisms and abiotic features of the environment result in intimate cultural practices and traditions that kind of focus on key biological organisms in that environment. And that can often, these relationships and these ceremonies and traditions over time can help strengthen and deepen community ties with the environment. In more current times, that can also be a way to engage people with traditional or indigenous culture, as well as indigenous land stewardship. It's important in a lot, and like I mentioned, nothing is a monolith. But in most traditions and most kind of indigenous perspectives, it's really important to make the most of every harvest and not let something go to waste. Only take what you need and to give something back in return. So I don't know if I have a Oh, I do have bullet points on that. So it's good to understand how to use all the different plant parts to minimize extractive waste. We've seen this photo, or I've shown this photo before on the bottom left of soaproot. So soaproot, Chlorogallum palmaridicum, or whatever is really a long name, is a very important cultural species across our state and beyond in the West. It's used for all kinds of different things. The fresh spring greens are edible, and I just had some a couple weeks ago when we were out and doing field work. Tastes great. It felt like a cow. And then the older spring greens aren't as tasty, but deer and wildlife still like it a lot. It's nutritious. The bulb itself can be used for a lot of different things. It has these fibers around it that you can see on the left-hand side that we peeled off at this point. And that can be used, actually carved out and then stuffed in here to be made into a brush after you heat it. You heat it up, the bulb itself becomes sticky and binds. And so people often use it as a glue. Raw, if you pound it up and smash it up, it has a chemical in it that causes temporary asphyxiation in fish. And so they use that to stun and catch fish in the river as well. And they also, different cultures also would cook the bulbs that are used to stun fish in an earth oven for 24 to 48 hours to destroy those toxins. And then they would eat them like many other bulb species, and more commonly refer to them as, or in current times, as Indian potatoes. And so a lot of times indigenous cultures think about how can we make use, or in traditional ecological knowledge also thinks about all of the different components of biomass allocation in a plant and how we can utilize all those different parts effectively. When you're thinking about making the most of every harvest and give back, for example, the Shumash, at least the San Ynez Band which was the tribe where I work nearby in Santa Barbara, if they take something or collect something from the environment, they leave something in return. Often it's like a piece of hair or something. So I take a piece of you, I leave a piece of me in return. Another way is to come back and conduct some stewardship, and to give back to that environment and help it stay as needed for ecological integrity and to maintain these types of familial relationships. A way of knowing, again, this is again a way of knowing developed based on shared lived and cultural experiences, based on a relationship with natural history and the environment, through multiple generations of observation and communication. So traditional ecological knowledge often provides the foundation for a lot of fundamental ecological theories that we think about these days. One good example is the use of cultural or prescribed burning to maintain rangelands and grasslands. And so this has been done in time immemorial by many different tribes all across the state, all across the West. And it was outlawed in the 1900s because we wanted to stop traditional or indigenous cultural practices to essentially facilitate or promote, in a sense, cultural genocide and assimilation. And so we now know, though, that a lot of these practices are really important in thinking about, for example, prescribed burn, keep habitats open, to prevent woody encroachment, and a lot of these other types of, I guess I have a bunch of bullet points on it. So again, to promote native forbs, to prevent woody encroachment, I guess I just said both of those things. So a lot of these kind of different practices in terms of also moving plants around, which now we're thinking more about, can be important as well. There's a lot of trading of different plant species. If you look on Califlora of bulb species, for example, you'll often see that they're distributed in a very strange way compared to a lot of other plants. There's a ring around the Sierra Nevadas. There's a line down the coast. That's because there's a lot of tribal people and different tribal groups that live at the foothills in the ring around the Sierra Nevadas and along the coastline. And so there was a lot of trading. I mean, I can't say for sure that's why it's distributed that way, but it's very common to see bulb species and other species we know are culturally important to be distributed that way. Probably because there was a lot of movement of material, a lot of transfer of genetic diversity, which also helps promote genetic diversity in the long term. And we also know having high genetic diversity based on to is important for a lot of different things to prevent inbreeding depression, just like with humans, or also to promote what we call genetic rescue. So sometimes a disturbance or management factor comes in and wipes out a population, but maybe there's a species with some genetic abnormality or some genetic difference, or there's diversity in genetics that didn't really do well before, but now that everything else has been wiped out, that weird maladaptation, previously maladaptation, is now an important adaptation that allows the entire population to then repopulate and survive. And so that's what we call genetic rescue. If it's in the context of climate change, we call it climate rescue. It's also important to remember that traditional ecological knowledge is very sensitive and is private, and it's developed with a group of people over time. Some of it is public, like some of the stuff I share with you is very common traditional ecological knowledge. It's not appropriate for a person like myself or a non-Indigenous person to share private traditional ecological knowledge of the tribe without the permission of the tribal council. And that's because of a history of violence and genocide and extraction. And because of that, it's really important to think about data sovereignty and tribal sovereignty and food sovereignty. So supporting why there are more ecological TEK now. As a society, we again are starting to understand more about the importance of lived experiences and other ways of knowing. We recognize the scientific method is great, but it's not perfect and that it can't capture everything. And just because it's not published scientifically, just because there's no statistical values like I'm forcing you guys to put in, it doesn't mean what people experience on the ground in the field doesn't matter and isn't important. And a lot of times those people on the ground have a really good relationship and understand what's happening on the ground better than the people studying it because they're there all the time. They spend their free time there because they want to, not because they have to. Not that I have to either, but I love going there. But I only have so much time and I live in other places, and it's really important to be there in that spot. It's also important, and there's been more time to develop, like I mentioned, there's a lot of mistrust because of history of violence. And so it's important to have time, and we've had more time now to develop trust and repair between academics and land managers, traditional conservationists, which were kind of anti-Indigenous in terms of their perspectives in the early 30s. And so there's been time to kind of redevelop some of this trust to, again, support more traditional ecological knowledge and for people to feel more safe sharing it and using it. it was also criminalized. And so that's another part of it too. And understand the history of land practices that kind of promoted the productivity and diversity in these systems are really important to guide both the present and the future. Because again, if we've been burning in these habitats for centuries, for thousands of years, and we're wondering why can we not maintain these grasslands? Well, maybe it's because we're not doing what these grasslands have been experiencing for thousands of years. And a lot of times, though, TEK still isn't used because a lot of it has been lost through genocide and also through institutional, both through governmental institutions, societal institutions, and academic institution suppression. Relearning lost knowledge can be really difficult, can sometimes be traumatic, and is a generational process. Sometimes we have no idea to know what to know or what to look for if we haven't thought about it and we've lost that knowledge. And so it takes a lot of time to redevelop that. And so, for example, in Santa Cruz, we have the Amamutsin Relearning Program, where the local arboretum at Santa Cruz, UCSC, works with the local Amamutsin non-federally recognized tribe to provide them a space to do cultural relearning, where they can come and plant native species, they can harvest it, they can practice different things, where they can make it, they can basically have a space to, again, learn and practice some of these traditional, lost traditional practices. It's also, again, important as a reminder to respect tribal sovereignty in knowledge and distribution of whatever management practices and histories you develop. Even if you're working with those specific tribes, you need to be really careful about how you share that information and make sure you are sensitive about it. I think for time's sake, we're going to skip the question, but there is a star, so that means it's probably on one of your question sets. So the strengths of TEK. So ecology, everything depends. And traditional ecological knowledge is very in time and place. And that allows us over time through generations to develop a lot of really important, intimate knowledge of an ecosystem over time. And it's place-to-based knowledge. And you could hire, for example, a consultant from Southern California or Northern California or even from Humboldt to come out to some random ecosystem and conduct surveys and evaluate and assess how it might change over time. They might do a great job, especially if they're familiar with the area, but someone who knows and has lived there and watched the plants change, and if they know the plants and watched it change over time, will have a good understanding and a really important kind of understanding of how things change with climate patterns, with different types of management that you can't see in a single year when you're a consultant that just comes to a site to identify plants, even if you're a great botanist. These intimate relationships allow for attention to detail and understanding of the canary in the mine cage, or whatever the saying is, and like whatever species that's the coal mine, and what species might disappear first, or what types of issues we might be predicting in the future. And it's a strong sense of relationship with your place, and oftentimes a strong sense of relationship with a place and an environment drives passion, environmental passion, which also helps push people towards voluntary stewardship and protection of their lands. In California, management based on traditional ecological knowledge has been important for rangeland maintenance in California for a long time, especially since the loss of large ungulates. This spans a variety of ecosystems, including non-rangelands like forest ecosystems. So we know the oldest remains of humans are, maybe this has changed now, but this is 13,000 years ago in Santa Rosa Island, which is a channel island off of the Santa Barbara coast. And since then, we also know that there are over 500 tribal and indigenous groups / nations in just California. And in California, we also have uniquely the Rancheria system, which is only in California, where tribal people of displaced nations that no longer have lands can elect to become part of a rancheria and have that type of tribal community. And oftentimes rancherias are a mix of a lot of different tribal people.
What? is a rancheria, like, what's that versus like a reservation?
A reservation is federal, a rancheria is California state.
Okay,
And so rancheria is only in California. A rancheria allows for participation of different tribal people that no longer have lands or a reservation that may be non-federally recognized. That just so there might be Wiyot people, even though there is the Wiyot tribe
Mhm.
at part of Bear River Rancheria, part of Blue Lake Rancheria, and Trinidad Rancheria. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if you are part of a rancheria, you no longer can be a part of your tribal nation. So you can kind of make a choice of where you want to keep your like your tribal citizenship.
Okay, cool.
And there's some California statute that I don't know it though. And we already talked about this, but traditional ecological knowledge in rangelands or management in rangelands have been really important to promote high productivity, species diversity, as well as limit woody species encroachment. And birding practices were actually adopted by rangeland managers and producers too in the early 1900s, but eventually they were outlawed by the 1930s. And so ranchers actually at King Range in Petrolia used to burn in those areas in the 1910s and 1920s, and then it was banned after that. And then there's really great historical imagery of how the Douglas fir has been encroaching in those prairies over time. And that's why they're doing a lot of large tree removal up there now. So ethnobotany and ethnozoology is the study of interrelationships or the interrelationships between humans and plants and animals for food, shelter, medicine, or cultural activities. Traditional ecological knowledge is often geared to promote a healthy environment for all relatives or kin and to support human life through ethnobotany and zoology, but to give back at the same time through stewardship. So ethnozoology, for example, might include hunting, like harvesting mammals for food and production, or for non-food products. Very commonly, a lot of tribal people in California hunted things like antelope, deer, elk, rabbits, squirrels, bears, birds, anything. And it was important for not just food, but also regalia, clothing, and currency. And then we will finish the rest of these slides, or I will record the rest of these slides for next week. I think next week I'm going to record a lecture on wildlife, and we'll finish the ethnobotany stuff the following week before the presentations. And you're free to go.